Ready to go? Oh dear. Morning, everyone. Welcome to everyone in the room this morning and to those who are joining us online. My name is Anthony Sullivan. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the North Thames Genomics Laboratory Hub, and I'm opening the day today. It's a pleasure to have everyone here. For those of us in the room, I need to do the housekeeping to begin with. We're not expecting any fire alarms today, but if we do hear a fire alarm, straight out through the door there, across the road, and there's a statue of 4 servicemen. So just assemble around the statue if we do hear a fire alarm. Toilets are outside. And if I can just ask people to place their mobile phones on silent so that we're not interrupted, of course, across the day. If you need to take a phone call, I know that we're all busy healthcare professionals. Please just take your call and leave the room so that it doesn't interrupt the rest of the room. If anyone needs Wi-Fi, it is _HorseGuards Wi-Fi, and just enter your email address. So I've got to have to do multiple hands, so just bear with me. So we are a tiny bit late starting, sorry about that, but we've got a very full day, lots of different things on our agenda, lots of different elements to the North Thames Genomic Medicine Service we're talking about today. First of all, we're going to hear about the journey of the genomic test in a session chaired by Liz. Our patient reps on our patient and public engagement panel are joining us for a session about what they want from healthcare professionals when talking about genomics, which is really, really important because that's why we're all here, to make things better for our patients. We're going to talk about equity in the afternoon, and then we're going to talk about some of the wonderful work that our highly specialist laboratories do within the North Thames GLH. Lots of time for coffee and for lunch and breaks, and a good chance for everyone to network, meet new colleagues, ask questions. There's lots of us here from the North Thames GMS. If you've got any questions or anything you want to talk about, please come and find us across the day. We'd be really happy to chat with you. So I'm just going to talk to you about what's been happening in the last year in the North Thames Genomics Medicine Service. So now this should be a video if this works properly, and it's 4 slides in and I'm not sure. There we go, we're up and running. So we actually did quite a lot in 2024. And when you put it all together like that, you can see how much wonderful work has been happening in both our GLH labs and our GMSA. Just to give you a bit of an overview of the testing that we do in the North Thames Genomics Laboratory Hub. Our laboratory hub is a network of 7 organisations. In 23-24, we undertook nearly 150,000 genomics tests. We are the second busiest GLH in the country. Per head of population, we actually do the most genomic testing for the population in our area. We do 17% of all of the genomic testing in England, and we do 23% of all the cancer genomic testing in the country. We do the most cancer testing of any GLH in the country, and that's 22% more than the second busiest GLH in terms of cancer genomic testing. So that's really, really impressive. Just to add to that, our genomic testing rate is growing anywhere between 10, 20 and 15% every year. It goes a bit like this, but it's continually going up. So we are a very, very busy GLH and our demand is growing, and there's always more work to do, as we'll probably hear later today in terms of the session around equity of access. So just talking a little more about the liquid biopsy service. This was for lung cancer, for non-small cell lung cancer. We were the first GLH in the country to deliver this testing, and we're really, really proud of this. This really is work done through our Royal Marsden Cancer Hub Laboratory. Not everyone is in the room today, but really this has been led by our scientific director, Professor Mike Eubank, Mikhail Valnion, Alison Marilla, and their strategy lead, Lewis Butler, have been really key in delivering this, and lots of other people working in the labs and on the ground. So in phase 1, we partnered with a commercial provider to deliver testing using commercially available technology. In phase 2, the Royal Marsden Laboratory delivered the testing within the NHS laboratory following a successful technology transfer. After the first 2 phases of the pilot was completed, we collected data on turnaround times, testing, outcome of patients, and the clinical impact of the result compared to the current pathway. And as this is an emerging technology, it was really vital that we did an economic evaluation of that. So if we look along there, in phase 3, we were the first, we were delivering phase 3 first. The Northwest GLH joined us in about August last year. And we understand that this will be commissioned on the test directory from the 1st of April next year. Sorry, I don't have enough hands to turn the paper, hold the microphone, everything. So in terms of the liquid biopsy, we collected patient data from the first 2 pilot phases, and that indicated that the patient pathway was approximately 2 weeks faster than the current tissue biopsy pathway. So patients with non-small cell lung cancer will often have invasive tests, bronchoscopies, lung investigations that will sometimes require general anaesthetic, theatre admissions. So the liquid biopsy takes a lot out of that pathway. For patients with targetable genes, this meant significantly faster access to targeted treatments, and this group often received treatment about 2 weeks earlier than the normal pathway. And so early economic assessments of that have estimated that this brings an £11 million net saving to the NHS in a year. And this is the type of change we need to be doing in the NHS going forward, given the current financial climate. And these savings are linked to things such as avoiding additional diagnostic tests, reductions in the length of the pathway, and actually getting the patients onto the right type of chemotherapy and target-treated treatment first, rather than being put on a less effective drug and then being moved across to the targeted treatment later. Obviously, we had our successful pilot transfer across, the technology transfer, and the Royal Marsden have done this in partnership with Guardant Health and have brought this into to mainstream testing in the NHS. So moving on, we're in the North Thames GMSA, we're also leading there's 8 networks of excellence, and we are leading the liquid biopsy networks of excellence. This is being led by Mike Eubank, who's hiding down the back of the room there. It was set up in 2004, and it's looking at the evidence we require to bring ctDNA into mainstream testing. As we've just heard about, we've looked at lung cancer, so non-small cell lung cancer. We're currently looking at cancer of unknown primary as well. Patients with cancer of unknown primary often have a long diagnostic pathway. They present with tumours. As the name suggests, where the primary tumour is not known. These patients can often go through multiple investigations that are quite invasive, require multiple hospital admissions, admissions to theatre, etc. So actually, the power of the liquid biopsy can reduce a lot of those tests. And it's estimated that we'll be doing this for about 1,000 patients with cancer of unknown primary when this goes live on the test directory. So just looking at the key assessments of the network. So application and technology requirements is one of the things we look at. Health economics evaluation, patient implementation considerations, pathway considerations, workforce and operational delivery considerations, and obviously our patient and public input into all of this is vital to the success of this. So this one, I think, is something that we should be extremely proud of here in the North Thames GLH. If you read down the bottom of the slide, it's cutting it off a little bit, but we stood this up in less than 4 weeks. Less than 4 weeks sounds impressive, but actually the start date of that was when we were called to a meeting at 10 a.m. on Christmas Eve to stand up testing with almost immediate effect. So a huge piece of work by a number of people in this room and in our GLH again. And it required a lot of people pulling together. Again, our laboratory down at the Royal Marsden stood up the testing rapidly. So Mike and Mikkel and their team, Alison, Marilla is our Director of Pathology and Clinical Genomics. Input from Cynthia and the education team about getting education packages ready to educate our professionals on how to order these tests. Our comms team, Fiona and Jacqueline, around getting the marketing out and making sure that clinicians were aware. So a really big team effort goes into getting this stood up at very short notice. ESR1 testing is for patients with breast cancer that are having targeted treatment. This will also, we believe, go onto the test directory from the 1st of April. So moving on to talking about the generation study. The generation study, for those who are not aware of it, is related to rare diseases in children. How this will work is it's still in a research phase, so it's patients signing up, but core blood is taken from the mother at birth. If core blood is not available, then obviously a heel prick test can be used, but core blood is the preferred method. And then the patients go on for whole genome sequencing. We're looking to detect potentially 223 treatable pediatric conditions. And why this is so important is that children with these conditions often have very lengthy journeys to diagnosis again. They will see the GP, they may present to A&E multiple times, they'll present to secondary care, they often will go to tertiary care, and then before they find themselves in a quaternary service such as Great Ormond Street for diagnosis. And that diagnosis can take quite a long time, and it's psychologically quite stressful for the parents of the child and the families of the child. If we can proactively find children who may have these conditions and investigate them in more detail, we can potentially take all of that stress out of that patient journey and that family journey. What we do is when the patients have the whole genome sequencing and they're suspected positive, they are fast-tracked into the right clinical care under the right clinical consultant in our geography, and they are given a confirmatory genomic test. So again, this is something we should be really, really proud of. We weren't the first GLH or GMSA to start this work, but what we are is we have now recruited the most patients across our geography. And again, this is due to the hard work of a number of people, midwives, especially within our geography. Chelsea and Westminster were our first site to go live in both of their hospitals, the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital and the West Middlesex Hospital. Imperial have joined, UCLH and Barts have joined, and we're also in discussions with signing up Mid and South Essex and Barking, Havering and Redbridge. It's really important for us that we reach out and we get those hospitals like Barking, Havering and Redbridge and Mid and South Essex involved. These are different patient populations, they're different groups, and they're often groups of patients and services that we haven't engaged as well with in the past. So this is really key for us. And then you might be here from another trust in our geography and thinking, actually, we might be interested in this. If you are, Paul Rives is at the front of the room. Come and chat to Paul throughout the day and he can tell you a little bit more about the Generation study. But in terms of signing up patients and actually the outcomes and the data, lots of hard work has gone into this as well. Lots of work being done by Tina, who's our lead midwife, Cynthia in the education team, Dom and Yvonne, who are in the room, have done a lot of work around this. So this is, again, something we should be really proud of, to have recruited the most patients to this study. As I mentioned earlier, genomic testing is going up at a rate of about 15% a year. We all know the current financial constraints of the NHS. We also know that we just don't have the workforce to keep employing people at this rate. So automation is going to be really, really key. The NHS Genomics Unit have laid out to us that automation and industrialisation is where they see the future going. And I'm really proud that we have led the way again in this in our GLH. Our cancer laboratory hub at the Royal Marsden has worked with automata technologies to develop an end-to-end system to increase capacity. We can put double the amount of tests through with minimal increase in technology staff in the labs. So that's really, really important if we're going to continue to address the 15% growth going forward. Dame Professor Sue Hill, who is our SRO for genomics, has visited the Royal Marsden lab with Richard Meddings, who was the chair of the NHS England, and they were really inspired by what we've done. And this is the prototype that's being recommended now across the country for labs to adopt. In our rare and inherited disease lab, we're also working with automata about how we can adopt the same technology in our laboratory so that we can increase the amount of testing for adults and children with rare and inherited diseases. And then finally, we're doing lots in terms of our digital journey as well. There's a national order comms project underway. There's different phases to this project. The alpha phase is the first phase, as the name would suggest. And again, this is a partnership across our GLH. We are the GLH that NHS England Genomics Unit have partnered with on this. So we have Imperial College, Gosh and the Royal Marsden. Gosh and the Royal Marsden are obviously laboratory hubs. We use Epic in our labs, but also we use Epic as an ordering system. Imperial use Cerner as a system, and Imperial, it shares the same Cerner platform across the entirety of Northwest London. So actually we can scale this up really quickly when this project is effective. So automatically we can bring on Chelsea and Westminster, London Northwest and the Hillingdon hospitals, who all share the same Cerner platform. And across our geography, we know that Cerner is used in the Barts Health Group, Barking, Havering and Redbridge, the Royal Free Group, and Epic is used in UCLH and will also be used going forward at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital. How the system works is clinicians will be able to order a genomic test in their own home EPR rather than a standalone system. That test, once ordered, will pass through to a central broker and the request will go into the lab that's going to process the test. Not all tests are done in our home laboratories. There's some very specialist ones that may go across the country. It will send that request directly to the lab that's going to do it. So that will speed up the end-to-end pathway for patients. We're moving into the beta phase of testing in 2025-26. And we've had really positive feedback from NHS England about how engaged our GLH has been and how excellent our teams have been. So that's something to be really, really proud of again. We're working with industry partners as well around a bioinformatics solution for our cloud storage. Again, this is really, really important. Genomic data takes up a lot of storage space. We may get to the point where we're running server factories of our own, and that's not something we can do. It's expensive, and we don't have the estates to do that. But there's also many benefits about having our data on the cloud and in the cloud environment as well. There's some environmental benefits, but other benefits down the long term is how can we enhance that and access that data for research? How can we move data around safely between our organisations for the best care of the patients? We're also looking at admin automation. Where can we automate our processes more in administration? We very much use Blue Prism technology to help process referrals, but we're exploring where there are other opportunities in terms of our admin workforce. If we can cut down unnecessary admin tasks, we can free people up to do things that only people can do. And that brings us on to the rest of the day now. So I'm going to hand over to Liz, who's going to take you through the first session. I think we've got a really exciting day planned ahead. There, as I said before, there are plenty of breaks. Use the time to meet new colleagues, to connect with old colleagues, to meet us from the GMS and the GMSA and the GLH. I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Anthony. So this is a bit of a multi-show now. So Liz is going to be, we're sort of overseeing this, and then other individuals from the audience are kindly involved in this next session. So I just wondered, Ailey and Dr. Warren, if you want to come forward a little bit, please. And Liz, Beth, you're there. Great. So this is really, it was thought together that it might be useful to go through the journey of genomic testing for individuals with prostate cancer. And these are the steps that we're going to go through. So Liz is going to start with the introduction and go through the main sort of somatic testing pathway. And we've been very fortunate to have involvement from a patient who's kindly sent us a video. That's Mr. Eddie Blair, and then also involving individuals from the cellular pathology laboratory who are going to talk to us through all that process, and then the actual laboratory process of how the actual testing is done. And then just to involve as well Ailey Watson, who's one of the genetic counsellors involved in the North Thames GMSA about education and training, getting genomics out there into individuals who don't usually order genomic testing and the implications of a genetic result. And then finally, just going through information about the education and training, which is ongoing. And this is, we were meant to have an hour and a quarter, Anthony, but it's been eaten into a little bit. So we'll see. We might run over a bit if that's all right. Is that okay? Okay, thank you. So without further ado, I'd like Liz is going to start us off. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. So I'm just going to take you through a bit of the background about prostate cancer, set the scene, what we know about prostate cancer genetics, and then talk through the mainstreaming pathway. So prostate cancer is the most common cancer in people assigned male at birth in the UK. It affects 1 in 8 men by the age of 80, with over 50,000 cases per year occurring in the UK and being responsible for 12,000 deaths per year. So it's a big health burden. There's a number of well-established risk factors. Firstly, age. The older you are, the higher your risk of prostate cancer, with 2/3 of prostate cancer cases actually occurring over the age of 70. In terms of ancestry, we know that there's a really high risk for men who are Black African, Black Caribbean. They have a risk that's twice that of white European men, with 1 in 4 Black men being diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime. They also have twice the risk of dying from prostate cancer, and they're more likely to present at a young age. And we know that genomics plays a large role in the different genomic risk that we see internationally. We also know that having a family history increases your risk of prostate cancer, and that increases with both the closeness of those relatives to you and the number of affected people there are in your family. So like all cancers, most prostate cancer is caused by somatic variants that are acquired during a person's lifetime, but there's a minority, about 5 to 10%, that are caused by a germline variant in a rare cancer susceptibility gene, and these are the cases that we're really thinking about today. So prostate cancer is known to be the most heritable cancer, with about 60% of prostate cancer thought to have an inherited component. And this is a mix of rare genetic variants and also common genetic variants. Now, there's a lot of interest in common genetic variants in a research setting, but it's not something we use yet in the NHS or in the test directory, so I won't be touching on that today, but I'm very happy to talk to anyone during the breaks about that a bit more and some of the research that's going on. So when we think about the genetic variants and associated with prostate cancer, the one that is most commonly thought about is BRCA2. So the risk for somebody that carries a mutation in the BRCA2 gene has a 4 to 5 times risk of prostate cancer compared with average, giving them an absolute risk of about 50 to 60% by the time they're 85. If you look at men who with very advanced prostate cancer, metastatic prostate cancer, then 5% of men will have a variant in BRCA2. And we know that BRCA2 carriers are diagnosed younger, they have higher grade disease, and they have significantly worse survival. So there's a lot of benefit to identifying who these people are through genetic testing. For BRCA1, there's a slightly higher risk, about 2 to 3-fold the average, giving an absolute risk of about 30% by the time a man is 85. And similarly, with the genes commonly associated with Lynch syndrome, which causes bowel, endometrial, and ovarian cancer, there's also a robust evidence base now to link these genes also with prostate cancer, mostly with the MSH2 and MSH6 genes, and this causes again a risk of about 30-35% by the time these men are 85. And these are the questions we get asked in clinic. What does this actually mean? What is my risk? So it's good to just talk through those numbers. And again, with both BRCA1 and the mismatch repair genes, it predisposes also to young onset and more aggressive disease. So again, very important to understand the genetic basis of a person's prostate cancer. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about BRCA1 and BRCA2 because in the mainstream pathway that is offered in the oncology clinics to men with certain prostate cancers, so very advanced prostate cancer, we offer both somatic and germline testing for BRCA1 and BRCA2. So these are tumour suppressor genes. Their normal function is to protect against cancer by repairing DNA damage. About 1 in 400 people in the UK will carry a BRCA variant, but there are certain groups of people that have a much higher risk of carrying a variant, such as those of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry or those from certain parts of the Shetland Isles, where the risk of carrying a variant is 1 in 40. And those are particular founder mutations specific to those populations. When we identify somebody as a carrier themselves, then they have a 50% chance of passing that on to their children. And we need to think about the whole family in the picture here and the process that those relatives will go through. And that's what Ailey will be talking about more later in this session. For those men who have advanced prostate cancer and are known to have either a germline or somatic BRCA variant, there is a targeted therapy called a PARP inhibitor that is very effective in extending life and good quality of life for several months in those people who've got very advanced disease and very limited treatment options available. So if they carry one of those variants, that's a really important piece of information just for that patient, but also for their family. For men who are known to carry a variant but who haven't had prostate cancer, at the moment in the UK, unfortunately, there's no targeted prostate cancer screening that is offered. In Europe, this is advised for all BRCA2 carriers over the age of 40, and we hope that the National Screening Committee in the UK will also adopt that recommendation. The reason for this is for prostate cancer, there is no brilliant screening test. There is a blood test called the prostate-specific antigen test, PSA test, which is a protein released by the prostate gland into the bloodstream. There's a lot of debate about what a normal PSA is, how often we should screen for PSA, and then when someone has an abnormal PSA, what should we do about it in terms of imaging and biopsying? And we know if we were to offer all men in the population a PSA test, this would result in a lot of overtreatment and overdiagnosis of cancers that would not necessarily need to be known about in that man's lifetime. But we do have lots of evidence to say that screening higher risk individuals, such as people with BRCA mutations and black men, it's probably beneficial, and the government are currently reviewing that at the moment to see whether they can make some recommendations for screening. So thinking about the wider family, why is it important? Obviously for the men with cancer, there's precision treatments that we can be thinking about. For the family members, there's other strategies that Ailey will be talking through, things like risk reduction, chemoprevention, surveillance, and the modification of some of those non-genetic life factors as well. And so for all clinicians involved in managing people with prostate cancer, it's always important to look at the wider family picture and consider whether there's anything there that might suggest that that family would benefit from having some genetic testing. So we use the National Genomic Test Directory to guide testing, and recently there are 2 indications for prostate cancer that were added. And it's this mainstream pathway I'm going to just talk through here. So this is where we've got our patient with prostate cancer. They've got advanced disease, and there's no hereditary cause suspected, but they would be eligible for a PARP inhibitor if we were to discover that they had a variant either in their tumour or in their germline. So we start off with the M218 from the test from the test directory to do tumour testing and see if we can identify a variant in the tumour. And then we would move on to do germline testing, where either we've identified there is a variant and we then need to understand whether it's in the germline or not, so applicable to the rest of the family members, or whether it is just limited to the tumour. But either way, they would be eligible for the PARP inhibitor if it was in the tumour or the germline. We also would do germline testing if the tumour testing was to fail, because often we're working on old tissue, and that is unfortunately quite common. And wherever we discover a germline variant, we would then refer that patient and their family to clinical genetics to go through all the implications of identifying that for them and their relatives. So the test directory additions were was in June 2023, where we had the germline and somatic test added to the directory, and this was off the back of NICE approving olaparib, the PARP inhibitor, for treatment for men who have a confirmed somatic or germline variant, who also have a very advanced prostate cancer that's spread and also hormone, no longer responding to hormones, and also those men who are well enough to receive treatment. So this is what the directory looks like, and it tells you how to go about the testing and who can order the test. And this is really done in the oncology clinics by the oncology specialists and offered to the patients. So we've got a video now, which was a video produced by some colleagues, Dr. Terry McVeigh and Dr. Alison Reed, which is patient-facing to explain the mainstream testing pathway to them. So we're just going to play that now. It's not a video. Okay. Excellent. Well, should we just move on to Angela's section while we maybe look at that in the... So I'm going to hand over to Angela to talk about the other pathways.
So it is a very good video. It explains things really well. It's really clear. And it's just Terry and Alison talking through the advantages of knowing if there's a BRCA gene either in the tumour or in the germline, and then the reason we want to know that so they can get the PARP inhibitors, which is the main message, trying to get out there, trying to improve the care for certain patients. So I'm stepping in because as a clinical geneticist, I'm talking about the germline testing. So really, somatic testing isn't something clinical geneticists have been involved in, but now are becoming more involved in, because obviously it's quite sort of blurry information that we get. So if we do a somatic test and something is found, the next step is it in the germline? And if you've done your paired testing, you would know that, but paired testing isn't always done. So this is showing R430, and I know some of you in the audience aren't familiar with the test directory because we had a little chat beforehand. And so if you go onto that QR code that Liz showed, there, that brings up the test directory, and it's literally the menu which you can see and work out which tests you can arrange or people are eligible for. So this is showing the R430 criteria for inherited prostate cancer. So Ros and Liz really pushed for this because prostate cancer gene testing was not available as a germline test until April 2023. So this is when the R430 criteria came in, and you and Professor Ros Eels were very involved in the criteria for this, which essentially is somebody with prostate cancer under the age of 50 or metastatic disease under the age of 60. and also those families where there was lots of cancer going on. So not just prostate, but breast, ovarian, things that make you think, could it be a BRCA1 or BRCA2 or other high-risk gene? So this is showing the R430, and so on the criteria, it can sort of shows you at the top, which is expanded there, but also who can request it. So genetics, oncology, and neurology. So in fact, in clinical genetics, colleagues and I very rarely, I don't think probably any of us have ordered this test. Anthony, you'd be able to tell from the lab who has actually ordered this test. So it isn't usually done by clinical geneticists, to be honest. And currently the tests included in that test, the genes, sorry, are shown here. So there are 8 genes, BRCA1, BRCA2, the Lynch genes, MSH2, MSH6, and MLH1, and then these other genes, CHEK2, ATM, and PALB2. So the other germline test, which clinical geneticists do much, much more, is the R208, which is the inherited breast ovarian cancer gene testing. So the main criteria on this are usually breast under the age of 40, bilateral breast cancer, as shown at the expanded here. But in terms of prostate, it's really if somebody presents and they've got a very strong family history of other cancers, usually, so that they have what we call a Manchester score of 15 or more, which adds up. So prostate cancer only gives us like a score of 1, but actually breast cancer, depending upon the age, gives a higher score, but ovarian cancer, say under the age of 60, gives a score of 13. So we use the Manchester score, we add it up, or we use something called CAN-RISC or Bodicea, which was Bodicea, to work out the likelihood of there being a BRCA variant or a gene variant of 10% or more, then somebody's eligible for testing. So clinical geneticists tend to use R208 more than the and that's just showing currently the 7 genes included in the R208 are listed there. The other criteria is the Lynch, R210, and again, this shows all the criteria, but prostate cancer, not on its own. If you've got prostate cancer under 50, then you do the R430, but this is showing the criteria for Lynch, and also the genes which are included on that are shown there, so the Lynch genes and EpCAM. So, have we got the video working, Fiona? No, not yet. Okay. So this is just showing the sort of steps in the pathway. So next, I'm going to move on to, I'd like to welcome Dr. Warren, who's kindly going to talk about the cellular pathology genomic pathway. So thank you.
So thanks for inviting me to this session, and I'm going to give you a bit of a background to BARTS and also tell you what we've been doing as a CPGC over the last year or so. That will give some information about the practicalities of the steps in the sample acquisition and testing pathway. So BARTS Health is a group of 5 hospitals in our trust covering 6 boroughs in North and East London, which are shown in the map on the left. We also have links with Barking, Havering and Redbridge, which is BHRUT Trust, and through our pathology partnership at BARTS Trust, we also work with Lewisham and Greenwich. So, as Anthony alluded to, the North Thames Genomics Medicine Service delivers the second highest number of genomic tests in the whole of England, and BARTS Health is that our catchment area covers a local population with a high cancer risk. So we have a local population where it's absolutely imperative to improve diagnosis and access and speed of molecular testing for somatic cancer. So just looking at the statistics on the right-hand side of the slide, our catchment includes over 1.3 million of local population, and the population is growing at a very rapid rate, 15% per annum. And we have some of the worst health statistics in the whole of London and also in the whole of England. So Tower Hamlets has the worst female healthy life expectancy, Hackney the second worst male healthy life expectancy, and the socioeconomic factors in our part of London are much worse than elsewhere in London in the UK, and the local population are reluctant to go to screening. So 20% of our local population smoke, and our uptake of bowel, breast screening and the targeted lung health check is well below the national average. So 20% of lung, colorectal, prostate and other cancers within London are from patients within our catchment area. Sorry. So what does a CPGC actually do? And what have we done to improve testing over the last year or so since we were stood up? So basically what we do, we're based within the cellular pathology department, and when pathologists make test requests, these are actioned by the CPGC team. So we source the tissue blocks, cut sections from the blocks, and then transfer them either locally to our LGL within Barts, where DNA or DNA is extracted and either tested locally on the salvage pathway, or we send the DNA to the Marsden, to the GLH for testing. So if you look at the top left-hand graph, this shows the cumulative number of cases equivalent to patients and the number of preps that we've been sending month by month. And you can see that this has been increasing steadily, and we've actually increased our estimated number of cases and preps originally estimated in 2023. So our local testing is growing. If you look at the bottom left of the slide, if you look at the number of patients being diagnosed with cancer each year and the number that are actually accessing testing, in 2022-23, approximately 70% of the local cancers diagnosed at Barts were sent for molecular testing. Now this has gone up in 2024 to nearly 90%. So this is all good news for the local population in terms of accessing molecular testing for cancers. And if we look at the turnaround time, since the setup of the CPGC, you can see from the top right-hand graph that our turnaround time for retrieving the block, cutting the sections, has consistently been low and below the recommended turnaround time for CPGC of 48 hours. So that's well under a day now. It's something like 6 hours mean time for the section cutting. The sections go immediately to the local genomics laboratory where DNA is extracted and then sent off to the Marsden. So our turnaround time for pathologist request to the sample being booked in at the Marsden, which is the top line on the right-hand graph, has gone down from something like 5.5 to 6.5 days to 5 days. So we've definitely speeded up turnaround time at our site, and obviously we're working with the Marsden to look at the other steps to speed them up. So if you look at genomic testing overall at our site over the last year, the bottom right-hand table, you can see the test request and all the individual steps between 2022 and 2024 have improved on average by 2 days, 1.3 days and 4.3 days overall. So how does this work in practice? I'll just show you a couple of examples. So the first example is from molecular testing. This is tissue-based testing of lung adenocarcinomas. So if you look at the top left-hand timeline, historically, the biopsy was taken, the pathologist gave the diagnosis, and then they requested protein biomarker testing, one of which was ROS1 immunohistochemistry. If that was positive, we then went on to ROS in situ hybridization, or FISH, and the total turnaround time for that was about 46 days. The success rate was poor for the FISH testing, and there was a very high failure rate. The turnaround time for NGS testing was about 35 to 40 days. And once the results got to the oncologist, the patient would access chemotherapy if they had a targetable mutation in about 4 to 7 days. So that was a very long overall turnaround time. So what we wanted to do was to reduce that tissue turnaround time for molecular testing by eliminating the ROS1 FISH and potentially also IHC, and moving straight to RNA sequencing. So the timeline would change to the top right, where obviously we still have to make the H&E diagnosis, but we're looking at potentially reducing the turnaround time to get the RNA sequencing report to 21 days. And that would mean patients could access chemotherapy within 28 days. I know that's still short of the normal CP guidelines, but we're working with the Marsden to reduce other parameters within that turnaround time. So we audited our steps after implementing sequencing, and you can see from the table on the bottom left, there's several steps in the pathway, but just to highlight the column on the right, the row in pink and the row in blue. So there is appreciable turnaround time for the section markup by the pathologist before sending to the Marsden. So we've reduced that turnaround time to down from a mean of 7, we can get it down to 2. And RNA sequencing turnaround at the Marsden on average is 17 days, but the shortest is 11 days. So the minimum turnaround time for RNA sequencing we could achieve is 13 days from pathologist request to the oncologist receiving the report of a targetable mutation. So that's huge improvements from the historic pathway. Also, the RNA sequencing detects mutations in other genes, and the pickup rate is 2.3% overall, compared with 1.3% with FISH for ROS, and the failure rate is 4.7% in our region for RNA sequencing, which is extremely good compared with national rates for RNA sequencing, and obviously our detection rates are much better than with FISH. So we hope that we can eliminate the FISH in the future and potentially also eliminate the ROS1 IHC. And obviously, we're part of the pilot for ctDNA testing, so that speeds up the pathway even more. And second example is colorectal cancer. So this is where we're working with the general cellular pathology laboratory to reduce turnaround times for molecular testing of resections. So in our catchment area, 90% of cancers are stage 3 or stage 4. We reflex test rather than waiting for the oncologist to request a MDT. And we also have looked at the pathway to speed up cancer testing on resections in the laboratory. So our general laboratory was underfunded, and we had quite a delay in cancer resection processing and reporting. So we've made short, medium and long-term improvements in the laboratory to speed that up. And if you just look at our prospective audit, the two columns on the right-hand side and the rows in red. So we've improved our specimen processing time for resections from 23 days to 4 days. And our H&E reporting is 5 days. So we're turning around those resection reports within 10 days. And our MMR reports are out in 6 days, sequencing out in 19 days. And so if you look at the top right-hand flowchart, we're now in the position where we can deliver report with MMR results within 28 days, and potentially with the NGS report in 25 to 28 days. So we're almost reaching the turnaround times from resection date to patient receiving chemotherapy of about 28 days. So I'd just like to thank the management teams, the Barts CPGC team and the local audit teams for producing that audit data. And those audits were part of the CGIP project that was funded by the local GMSA and through NHSE. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Warren. That's fantastic to see those improvements in those turnaround times and just changes of testing. Amazing. So next, I'd like to introduce Beth Kimpton, who's kindly going to talk through the whole sort of laboratory side of the molecular biology, molecular genetics testing process. So over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you. I've not used one of these clickers before, so you might have to bear with me. I'm Beth Kimpton. I'm the General Manager for the North Thames Genomic Laboratory Hub. So in general, we cover this middle part of the process. I'm completely untechnical, so apologies if this is too untechnical for people, but that is the sort of level that I'm going to aim this at. So this is a fairly generic journey of a sample through a pathway. So the sample arrives with us, and that can be in one of our hub labs. So we've got Great Ormond Street and Royal Marsden are our two hub labs, or one of our LGLs, which is a local genomic laboratory. And we have 5 others of those, including Barts, which Majoria spoke about. So the sample arrives with us. This can be a blood sample, it can be a solid sample, it could be already extracted DNA. From the CPGC, we tend to get already extracted DNA. It arrives at the laboratory, and then depending on the team, it's processed by either our wonderful technologist team, or it could be processed by one of our administrators. So they put it onto the system, usually a LIM system, which is a laboratory information management system. And across the patch, we have a few different systems that are in use. So we have over 170 technologists across the GLH, so our 7 laboratories. The sample then is processed, DNA is extracted if it hasn't already been, and then that DNA is tested. To keep it very, very brief, it goes through lots of very technical equipment, and long streams of DNA data is generated. Our bioinformaticians then use computer tools to analyze the data in the most simple way, and make it the most readable for the scientists who then analyze the data. And I've probably completely butchered that to the bioinformaticians in the room. I think it's far, far more complex than that. But in very layman's terms, that's what they do. And that is more and more important as larger amounts of data is generated. So as we move to sort of whole genome sequencing and whole exome sequencing, much more data is generated as part of this process than sort of smaller segments of DNA being sequenced. So this is more and more important to support the analysis of the genetic data and make it so you don't have to trawl through every single part, and it makes it a little bit more straightforward. We then have our scientific workforce, our clinical scientists, and they are registered clinical scientists, the same as our bioinformaticians. They have to go through lots of training to be registered. We have over 170, again, in the North Thames patch across our 7 labs, and they receive the genetic data, they analyse the genetic data, and they write reports that go back to our clinicians. Again, very, very simplified. They also support with the whole rest of the pathway. So in making sure that eligibility has been stuck to by the referring clinicians, putting the correct tests onto the system so that when the technologists do the testing, it's the right test. And they support in the laboratory as well with the testing that happens. So they help through the whole process. And then through the whole process, we also have our brilliant administrative teams. They support with receiving the samples, putting them on the system. Once reports are written, they support in getting these sent out, and they also monitor sort of general queries and that sort of thing as well through the process in the laboratory. So that's a very whistle-stop tour of the sort of key people that have a role to play in that middle part of the process. And it really is a team effort. It needs every one of those groups of staff to support in getting that through the laboratory and out back to the referring clinician. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. So at the Genomic Summit meeting in December, a number of us met, or I met some of the patient advocates, and one of the patients we met was this next speaker who's kindly sent us a video, who Liz had met through her doing her research on prostate cancer whilst in that role. And so the video is received from Ed, and depending on how it goes, we might shorten it a wee bit. But we just thought he's a patient advocate in east of England. He's done a lot of work, and I'll let him speak for himself. But hopefully you'll find it of interest. And obviously this is the whole reason we're here, is to try and improve care for our patients.
My name's Eddie Blair, and my talk these days is From Scientist to Patient, an Unexpected Journey. Because a couple of years ago now, 2.5 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. I was completely asymptomatic, and it came as a complete surprise to me. Up till then, I was leading a normal, seemingly healthy life in semi-retirement. I'd left Big Pharma a few years ago, was doing little bits of consultancy, and really was expecting to just trundle on as I was. So the diagnosis came as something of a shock. I never really felt down about it. It's something that happens, and it happens to everyone. And so I'm putting a lot of my energy now into making sure this sort of thing doesn't happen for our people. As I say, I am a scientist, so one of the things that interests me about prostate cancer is knowing the science behind it and the biology. So I've not had any real difficulty in having a good discourse with my oncologist. But on top of that, I have kept myself active by joining various committees and organisations. And I guess we'll talk particularly about East Genomics and the Genomics Medicine Service Alliance that includes your host today and in other meetings. I think the patient voice is particularly important because certainly when I worked in big pharma, I was initially a research scientist and then a clinical scientist writing protocols. But very rarely did I actually think, what's the patient perspective on this? And I think that's where joining the PPV and becoming a patient myself has actually said to me, actually, you know, patients should have more voice than they have. And I think, you know, we're seeing this consultation on the NHS for the future, and patient voice is very much the center of that. So I think people are gradually realizing that the patient voice is absolutely key to designing an appropriate and an effective healthcare system. Being a scientist, when I first got diagnosed, I did an awful lot of reading to understand, you know, the prevailing prognosis at the time, but I've never once viewed my condition as terminal. I've always known it's presently incurable, but I live in hope that we might be able to cure things. So when I was diagnosed, I looked up to see what type of information I could provide and could access through working with some leading clinicians and geneticists. And so I had two things done. One thing was to look at my germline DNA, and one thing was to look at my somatic tissue DNA. The somatic tissue was tested first, and it was done with a TPO 500 panel out of the University of Leicester through Maria Echevarria and Julian Barwell. And that was really quite interesting because everything in my tumor tissue came back as normal, apart from one very rare BRAF mutation. Now, I've talked to my oncologist about this BRAF mutation, and he, you know, has reassured me that, in his opinion, it's not relevant to my condition. Then I also contacted Ros Eales and Liz Bancroft at the Royal Marsden, and they offered me a chance to participate in a study where they're looking at, or they were looking at, I think the number is about 400 SNPs that it have found associated with higher risk of developing prostate cancer. And not quite amazingly, but interestingly for me, I came back with a 2.5 times higher likelihood of developing prostate cancer. Now, of course, that's a bit late for me, but it does mean that I can take this analysis and talk to my brother, my nephew, my brother's son, my nephew, my two sons, and just other blood relations to say, look, this is the risk I have. And I think it's important to communicate that hereditary risk because, as we've seen quite recently in a very high-profile case of Chris Hoy, his father and his grandfather both had prostate cancer, but he was not offered any sort of testing from a relatively young age. So at 48, he's diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. So I think my appreciation of the hereditary nature of prostate cancer has increased somewhat by my own genetic testing journey. The test directory is a very interesting thing. Again, it's one of these things I just did not know existed, but I look often when the new releases come out to see what tests appear, particularly for prostate cancer. But in my past career, I've worked in several different cancer types, largely because I'm working on products that treated a number of cancers, you know, such as immunotherapies, but also because I've been involved in Herceptin and HER2 testing, KRAS, BRAF, etc. So it was interesting to see those tests appear in the directory after I'd been writing protocols that included them as an experimental diagnostic tool to support a clinical trial. What is really quite surprising is the turnaround, not turnaround time in terms of testing, but the shortness of the time from a test showing utility in a clinical study to actually being adopted and inserted in the NHS directory. And I think that is a wonderful demonstration of the fact that the NHS can move very, very quickly when the opportunity arises. And that's both the incorporation of tests into the directory, but for my own diagnostic odyssey, I was seen in a 2-week turnaround time. And that 2-week turnaround time, and I'm not being melodramatic here, probably saved my life because PSA levels were extremely high and could have gone to a point where it was terminal if I hadn't been quickly assessed, diagnosed, and treated very, very quickly with an effective hormone deprivation therapy. So, you know, I know people talk about the NHS being slow and certain things being slow to be acted upon. In my case, and certainly in terms of the test directory, then the NHS has moved very, very quickly. I think that's a wonderful thing. The challenges for prostate cancer are that there's certain high risk groups who I believe should be subject to the initial stages of a screening program. Who are those people? Well, I'm talking about Black men and ethnic minorities whose risk is twice that of Caucasian men. So Black men have a 1 in 4 likelihood of developing prostate cancer, whereas I have a, you know, in all things considered, had a 1 in 8 chance of developing prostate cancer. So I think it's particularly important that the NHS rises to a challenge of getting minorities and ethnicities to join the NHS journey early so that they get that earlier diagnosis. So I guess I'm really talking about equity, diversity, inclusion of NHS services. So that is one challenge I see for prostate cancer. The other challenge in prostate cancer is, as I mentioned earlier, the hereditary nature. And I think we need to move to a stage where, again, men at risk of hereditary prostate cancer are again part of a screening program. Now, I know PSA is not an ideal test, but honestly, there's a number of studies now that say the PSA test does more good than the harm of misdiagnosis. So I think until there's something better, the PSA test is a viable test to use as a screening test to enter the diagnostic pathway. And then we can insert things like multi-parametric magnetic resonance imaging, and then go into transperineal guided biopsies, which have a lower risk factor, and that's why the harm from the PSA test reduces. So I think that's the two specific challenges around prostate cancer. The wider challenges for the NHS is to get everyone, and I mean everyone, every walk of life, to understand the value of genetic testing, and particularly, for instance, in cancer, how circulating tumor DNA as a technology can help guide and monitor treatment responses in a way that doesn't require invasive biopsies throughout the course of the patient's journey. So I think as I say, a screening program for prostate cancer would be wonderful within the NHS. But I think technology adoption and wide dissemination and appreciation of utility by everyone, so talking about EDI again, is one of the challenges and one of the things that I do think the NHS can meet. I'm just sorry I can't be with you all today, but on this particular day, I'll be in Antarctica watching penguins, whales, and the best thing of all, albatrosses. And hopefully the sea ice is going to be kind to us as we cross the Drake Passage. So I'm sorry I can't be there, but wish you all the best.
So thank you, Ed. We're really sorry you're not here. He's a wonderful man, and but hopefully you could just see how it's important. He's an East of England genomics individual who's involved in the patient-public engagement, but he's very kindly engaged, obviously, with Liz and ourselves. So we're very grateful to Ed. Thank you. And next, I'd like to move on to Ailey Watson, who plays a big role in genetic counselling and getting the message out there to non-geneticists. So over to you.
So one of the things that Ed mentioned in his video there, just to sort of highlight it for you, is he mentions that he had a germline genetic test within the NHS. And his experience was that actually they didn't find any significant single variants that confirmed that he had an inherited predisposition to cancer. He was talking about a research polygenic type study where he was mentioning that 2.5 times risk. So I think Ed is probably a good example of the majority of prostate cancer patients that have this germline test, in that we don't find a variant a lot of the time. But what happens in the minority where we do find something? So we do find a germline variant that is confirming an inherited predisposition to cancer. Now, there's a whole host of implications, and that's where genetic counselling comes in. So it's helping the patient and their family to manage and sort of understand all of these implications as well. I'm not going to manage to get through absolutely everything that could possibly be an implication, but to give you some headlines, I think when we think about the patient themselves, we've established an increased risk of cancer potentially for the future. And so in some circumstances, it's appropriate to refer for screening, refer for management to help think about what can we do around that cancer risk. Now, I appreciate that we've heard today that the PSA test is not rolled out in terms of a screening program, but somebody, for example, with a germline BRCA variant might then be able to request PSA tests from their GP in the future. And as Liz alluded to earlier, if we're thinking about women sometimes with one of these BRCA variants, then actually we are talking about additional breast cancer screening and in some circumstances surgery, if that is what the patient wants, to think about reducing their risk for the future. There's also a huge psychosocial impact on somebody when they know that they are at risk of developing a cancer in the future. Now, some people think about getting a germline variant that explains their cancer diagnosis as something quite positive. We found an answer. It gives them a reason as to why they developed that. I'm sure you can imagine that many people with a cancer diagnosis can often think, why me? And so though sometimes some people process that as something positive, other people think of it as something negative. You know, we've now highlighted a risk for the future. And in some people that confirms their fears that actually we're also talking about a potential risk for their children. This isn't just about me and my cancer diagnosis anymore. So that's quite complex in the way that it can impact somebody. There are also implications for family planning. So if somebody knows that we've established a germline variant from a genetic test, then they might not have had children already. There might be options available to them if they're really worried about passing this on. You might have heard of things like pre-implantation genetic testing, where we can do genetic testing on an embryo. So those sorts of things might be available to them, and we can guide them through that from a genetic counselling perspective as to, is this something that they want? Let's think about it at an individualised level to support them with those choices. It's also really important to think about disclosure of those genetic results, so it can have an impact on insurance. We've hinted already today at that wording of a predictive genetic test. So I'm going to come on to that in a second, but there are insurance implications when you're found to have a germline genetic variant. Now, the way that works for family members, a genetic test result, though it's important for your patient, we know that other family members are also at risk of carrying that as well. And so the results do affect relatives. The fact that we have that result at all means that there are immediate implications for relatives. And you can see the third bullet point down talks a little bit about the importance of sharing results. So if your patient themselves, who's been found to have a germline variant, needs to then be able to, or be willing to share that with other family members, otherwise those family members don't know that they're at risk. And Eddie was talking in his video around the benefits that he feels that he can now share that with his male relatives. But in a circumstance where we find something at a germline variant level, actually it's everybody in the family, regardless of sex or gender, that needs to know about that result. And enabling family members to have that result, have that information, means that they can get access to their local clinical genetic service, where a specialist can then talk them through what this means and talk them through predictive testing. Now, predictive testing really means, does that individual want to have that test that will predict their cancer risk for the future by identifying that familial variant? And many people choose that actually they don't want to have that test, or they do want to have that test, and supporting them through that process is really, really key. For us in genetics, we do discuss strategies, therefore, with patients around how they share that information with their relatives. We're not suggesting that they hold a conference like this and start telling all of their relatives all of the information that they know about their variant, but it is important to think about, how do you sow that seed? Where does your responsibility lie? How can you start that communication process so that the genetic services can then come in and continue supporting the family members from there on out? Now, I think when we talk about germline variants, and we've been talking today about the samples themselves, the labs, the process by which we do that, all of us understand that there is a patient behind this sample, a patient behind that test. And you might look at this slide and think, if I was found to have a germline variant, that some of these would be the questions that I would have. Some of these words in terms of emotions would be some of the things that I might feel if I was found to have that result. And there's no such thing as a right answer about how somebody should feel or how somebody will feel. And their response to a genetic test result is going to change over time. Your initial reaction might be very different to 4 months down the line, a year down the line. And again, genetic counselling is about supporting this whole process. Thinking about that first presentation of that person into a genetic service. How do we support them then? How do we support the family moving forwards? And I think if this is my big sell, to make sure that you're referring for genetic counselling, then I've done my job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ailey. That was great to hear your role, which is incredibly important, supporting families cope with a genetic diagnosis. So next, we just wanted to highlight some of the education and training that's ongoing, and thanks to Cynthia, who's here, for all your help with all of this always. But this is just flagging up some of the information that's available on the Genomic education program, so that all those links can be accessed and useful resources. And then some of the things that we've been doing. So we've AstraZeneca has kindly sponsored a day, which is the aim is to help teams involved in prostate cancer genetics to have a focus day. And on the left, you can see the speakers who are going to be involved. It's really the whole helping those teams take forward genomic testing for the benefit of their patients, and learning about the research studies which are ongoing and the benefits medically and surgically, and the support available really for those teams who are trying to roll out prostate cancer gene testing, which, as you can see, there's different pathways people are coming into it. So hopefully that day will be that's going to be on the 20th of June, and it's the Friday, and there's 80 places, and it's face to face. So it'll be a very focused day, which people who are involved in prostate cancer genetic testing are very welcome to attend. And we're just about to advertise that further. The other thing is we're doing quite a lot of bespoke teaching to teams that come to us and say, can you talk to us about prostate cancer or other genomic testing? And so we can do bespoke teaching for teams. And the other thing is, on the first Thursday of every month between 12:30 and 1 o'clock, we have what's called Genomic Question Time. So we're encouraging mainstreamers, so non-geneticists doing genetic testing, to log in then. So if anybody's attended any of the genomic testing courses, then they'll get a link to the Genomic Question Time. So, or you can just pass it on if you have that link to colleagues who want to ask any questions. And members of the team here, such as Nick Bass, who's involved in in dementia, and intellectual disability and things. So and dementia, he kindly attends, and Ailey and also Pooja. So we're there, and we can try and answer questions. And if one's being bombarded with questions about genomic testing, it's quite useful to be able to direct colleagues there. So please do use that forum. So I think we've made up time a wee bit. And I would encourage you to see the video that Alison and Terry have put together. So maybe we could include that with a link after the day. Yes. So next, thank you very much. I want to say thank you very much to everyone who's been involved, Dr. Warren and Beth and Ailey and Liz. And just now, if anybody has any questions, please fire away.